But this is the one time of year when it seems appropriate to talk about Christmas trees. And what are the meaning of these trees in our faith? For the last month, most of us have been surrounded by Christmas trees. You either had to haul one into your house in some parking lot that we transformed into a temporary arboretum, or maybe you pulled it up out of the basement, an artificial tree out of boxes, or maybe you don't have a tree at all, but you've been bumping into them everywhere you go, whether it's at the mall, at church, or in friends' houses. Love them or hate them, Christmas trees are everywhere at this time of year. But why do we have them at all? Well, tradition is the short answer. We have them because we're supposed to have them, because we've always had them, and that's just what you do. But that doesn't really explain anything at all. It just explains that your parents had them or your relatives had them, and you're just going to keep doing it. And it doesn't shed any light on what's actually up with them. Because if you think about it, Christmas trees are a pretty impractical thing that we do. We devote about a month a year to having something inside that's just going to drop needles, and we're going to put presents underneath it where the needles can drop onto the presents, and maybe even some sap, or if you're like me and you try and water the tree underneath and the water starts spilling all over the place. I mean, Christmas trees just aren't practical. They're not easy to get into the house, and they're a really silly place to put presents. Why not just put presents on a table beside the Christmas tree? But instead we tuck them underneath. They're also either difficult or lovely to decorate, depending on your point of view, but we keep all these decorations for an entire year so that we can use them for just 8 days, 20 days of the month. It's a strange thing that we do. And there's no obvious answers in the Bible to why we do it. So I'm going to try and put Christmas trees into a very different kind of perspective. But to do that, I need to go first all the way back to that first tree that we know about in our faith, which is the one that Jerry read to us about in Scripture. We hear that that tree, the tree of good and evil, is at the root, pun intended, of all of our problems. Adam and Eve have been created by God to tend to Eden as gardeners. They're vegetarians, but they've been told that of all the trees in the garden, there's one that they must never touch, and that's one called the tree of knowledge or the tree of good and evil. If they eat it, they will die. The serpent tricks Eve into eating it, saying, "You're not going to die." And so she eats it, doesn't die, and convinces Adam to eat of it as well. When God finds out, he kicks them out of the Garden of Eden. And in a passage that comes a little bit later, he says, we must get them out of the Garden of Eden, because what if they find the other tree, the tree of life, and by eating it become immortal like us? So they are dismissed from the Garden of Eden and kept out by the flaming sword of Eden. This strange myth is offered as the explanation for why life is so hard for human beings, why we sin so easily, why even childbirth is painful. It reads like a myth, not history. Yet among its perplexing features is why our fate as a species should be decided by the simple act of plucking a piece of fruit. I mean, why? You know, as kids, everybody steals a piece of fruit from an apple tree or whatever, and that doesn't condemn us to a life of crime, right? So why should plucking this one piece of fruit off of this tree have such enormous consequences for the fate of the entire human race? Why didn't God just forgive Adam and Eve and move on? Why should eating just one piece of fruit be so pivotal? And why is it a tree anyway? Why wasn't it a forbidden river that they weren't allowed to wade into? Or why wasn't it a forbidden rock that they weren't allowed to sit on? Why should it be a tree? The story of Adam and Eve was written down around 2,500 years ago. And the story itself is probably much older, but we've been told orally for generations and generations and generations. Now, spin forward 2,000 years, so 500 years ago. Our ancestors, European ancestors of us anyway, when we discovered how to sail properly with proper ships, we set out around the year 1492 and thereabouts and started exploring the world and found the Americas, obviously. We also went to Asia, where we found spices. We started bringing back silver and gold and spices. This is called the Age of Discovery. It's also the age at which the sailors and the explorers and later scientists and anthropologists started bringing back stories as well.
They brought stories from all over the world about other people's creation myths, how they believed the world was made and how human beings were first created. And what they encountered was that tons of these myths involved trees. The stories come from all over. In India, the Buddha reaches enlightenment as he sits beneath the Bodhi tree. You can see in this picture here, he's sitting beneath the Bodhi tree meditating, and the figure on the right is Mara, the Buddhist version of Satan. He is trying to distract the Buddha from reaching enlightenment by throwing all sorts of illusions and so forth at him, trying to make sure that he doesn't become absolutely centered. But the Buddha manages to resist his temptations under the Bodhi tree, reaches enlightenment, and becomes the Buddha that we know now, who reaches nirvana and offers nirvana to others. But it happens underneath a tree. In Scandinavian countries, they found that the creation myth involved Odin. Odin, who was the greatest god of all of the Norse gods, who straps himself to a tree for 9 days where he kills himself so that he can be reborn. Once again, it is a tree that allows him to experience both death as well as immortal life. In the Americas, among the Mayans, this is a picture of one of their hieroglyphs. You can see a tree in the middle of it. There is a tree called the Yachi tree, which holds up the heavens like a tent pole. It separates earth from the heavens, and it is the conduit by which souls can go up and down from the earth to heaven as well as the underworld. And finally, among the Muslims, the Prophet Muhammad, when he journeys on his night journey to Jerusalem, is swept up into the 7 levels of heaven, and when he gets to the final level of heaven, the 7th level of heaven, he finds it is guarded by the tree of immortality, a clear reference back to the Eden myth. And among the Hindus, not to be left out, for them the universe is created and destroyed over and over again in vast, vast eons, but the one thing which remains stable throughout all of that is the banyan tree, which is the only piece of creation which ever lasts. So all over the world, if you want to talk about the creation of human beings and the cosmos itself, there is a tree involved. In time, anthropologists and religious scholars noticed the Jews were just one of many cultures which involved creation myths which involved the tree. And it was noticed that all these stories have a few things in common. The tree is never just a normal tree. It gets the name the world tree or the cosmic tree because it digs deep into the underworld, which is the land of the dead, and its branches go all the way up into the heavens where the gods reside. In the middle is the realm of life where we live, the present. And the thing about cosmic trees and stories about them is that travel between the realms is always possible. This is how you go up and down through the cosmic tree. Now, this may all sound kind of esoteric or weird, but you all grew up with the story of the cosmic tree. Every last one of you heard this as a child. The story is Jack and the Beanstalk. If you recall, in Jack's story, Jack is living with his widowed mother, and they are on the brink of starvation. They only have a cow left. This is all the wealth that their father had, it's been narrowed down to this one cow. And Jack's mother tells Jack to go into the market, take the cow, and bring back something that can keep him alive. He goes and he unwisely trades the cow for some magic beans. When the mom gets the magic beans and finds that they're inedible, she throws them out the window in disgust. And the next morning, Jack wakes up to find that the bean has rooted itself in the ground and has grown all the way up into the heavens. And Jack decides to climb up. We know what happens next, right? He goes up, discovers a giant castle of gold, and a goose that lays golden eggs. He steals the gold, he runs down the tree, or runs down the stalk rather, and the giant starts coming down after him. In all cosmic trees, the 3 levels can move. People at the top can move down, people at the bottom can move up. So Jack runs down the tree, the giant runs after him, Jack grabs and actually chops down the beanstalk, and the giant dies. There's always death in the story of these trees, but there's also the possibility of immortal life as well, because the 3 realms are all connected. Now, all over the world, people who have had no contact with each other possess stories of sacred trees, which link the dead, the living, and the gods. The Mayans in Central America came up with this idea completely independently of any contact with European or Semitic religions or civilizations. This is something which has just happened independently all over the world. This appears to be evidence that there are some aspects of human consciousness which we actually share in common, even if we're not sharing information culturally. The Jungians would call this the collective unconscious. This is not something which anyone has a good theory for. However, what is clear is that cosmic trees are important to human beings. And now, to double back to Eden, there's nothing random about the fact that a tree was involved in our creation story. In fact, it would be more surprising if there wasn't a tree involved. All cultures, not all cultures, but most cultures have stories of trees like this, so it's not surprising that the Jews did as well. In our creation myth, the cosmic tree has been divided into two. There's the tree of death, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which Adam and Eve taste of. And then there's the tree of life, which is another part of the garden. The penalty that they suffered by eating from the tree of death was not that they were punished to die, but rather that they gained access to part of the cosmos too soon. There's lots of commentaries by Christians and Jews alike that the crime wasn't that they were never going to get to eat the tree of good and evil, but just that they got to it too soon. And human beings act like immature gods. And in the midst of our climate crisis now, it's easy to see that. We think that we understand everything and we're in control of everything, and yet we seem to take things too far. Like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, we have no sense of proportion, so we just follow our desires as far as they will go. We judge other people according to what we think is good and evil, and then find out that we make grotesque moral mistakes. Had we matured a little bit more, perhaps we would have been ready to eat the tree of good and evil. But we didn't, and as a result, according to the myth, we became susceptible to death. If all of this seems obscure, I know that it does, it's because we're not used to thinking this way in Christianity. In the story of Christ, we don't hear too much about trees. So if cosmic trees are so important, then why is it that Christianity doesn't have an important tree in its story, aside from the Garden of Eden? Well, the fact is that it does, and it's just this tradition has become lost to us. Starting with the letters of Paul and the early theologians, they commonly refer to Christ's crucifixion as happening on a tree. They refer to it over and over and over again as a tree that Christ was crucified on. And in the Middle Ages, they started making paintings like this one. And there's many of them. Christ hanging on a tree instead of a cross. It allowed them to make clear connections to the Garden of Eden story. Humankind fell because we disobeyed using a tree, so humankind can only be restored if someone dies on a tree. Human beings disobeyed, so Christ obeys on the tree. The first tree brought death. The cross tree brings eternal life. In the Garden of Eden, there are two sacred trees, right? There's the tree of good and evil, and there's the tree of life. In the cross, there are two pieces of wood that come together, as though restoring these, putting them back together. And Christ is the conduit through which the dead will travel up into heaven. Now, this is something we don't talk about too much in our tradition, but if you read the epistles closely, it was believed that when Christ died on the cross, he's dead on the cross, he's brought down, and then 3 days later he's raised on Easter Sunday. But what did he do in between? Tradition has it that Christ descended into the underworld, where all the souls of everyone who had ever died were kept, from Adam and Eve forward. And Christ preached the good news to the dead and brought them to heaven on the third day when he rose. So the cross is a cosmic tree. It leads down into the underworld of the dead, and it leads people up to heaven, where they will be able to enjoy eternal life. The cross is the tree that links death, life, and the afterlife. Afterlife became a popular image in medieval Christianity. But in the 1500s, when Martin Luther and the Protestant Revolution began, they felt that the Catholics had gone far too far in their indulgence in symbolism. And so in churches that they took over, they took down all the statues of saints, and they slowly started making churches more and more Spartan in appearance, until ultimately we get to churches like our own. This is a lovely church, but aside from Christmas time, we don't have a whole lot of symbols on the walls aside from the cross and the candles, which incidentally, by tradition, they're meant to look like a tree, because they're 7 branches. But we've stripped things down and taken the symbolism out of Christianity. And we've become very rational in our Christianity. Our Christianity increasingly is a Christianity of morality, where we talk about morals. We don't talk about metaphysical things very much. And this whole symbolism thing seems kind of foreign to us. Except for one time of the year, when it all comes rushing back in a way that we don't appreciate, but we do it anyway. And that's this time of year. Because at this time of year, we go through that strange practice of putting up Christmas trees. So, I'm going to suggest to you that the reason we put up Christmas trees is because they are cosmic trees. And our souls get that, but we don't get that consciously. So let me explain. As I said earlier, cosmic trees always serve as a conduit, right? They represent the 3 levels of existence: the heavens, the world that we live in, and the underworld. So if a Christmas tree was a cosmic tree, then at its top it should be pointing to the heavens in some meaningful way. Does that seem right? What do we put on the top of our Christmas trees? Angels and stars, right? We explicitly re-invoke the Christmas story and the fact that that tree's no good at all. There, we've got a star there, and lots of people put angels on their trees. So the top of the tree is clearly pointing to the heavens. Now, the roots of the cosmic tree point to the dead. They go down into the underworld of the dead. And what do we put underneath our trees? Presents. And our presents represent material goods, of course, but they also represent our relationships with our family. Right? If you get presents from a grandparent or a relative who lives far away, you stick it under the tree until you open it on Christmas morning. And our family trees, in essence, are basically underneath our trees, where the roots of the Christmas tree would be if we hadn't chopped it down. So our family roots and the roots of the tree are melded together. It would make much more sense to put those presents on a table beside the tree. Much easier to access, not in the dark, no needles dropping on them, but instead we shove them underneath the tree because it feels right. Well, it feels right because that tree is digging into our roots of our family, going from our existing relatives even down into the ones who have passed on. And then the middle of the tree on a cosmic tree represents the present. And the present, of course, is always fleeting. Right? Time keeps passing. Our mortality is what is in the present. And on Christmas trees, what do? We put on bulbs, which look like little worlds, but they're fragile. Right? The bane of everybody's existence when putting up a Christmas tree is when you drop a bulb and it shatters on the ground. We also put tinsel, which represents icicles. And icicles are inherently ephemeral. They melt, they go away. We often put beads on, which are obviously just plastic versions of berries, which people used to put strings to, and the berries dry out and die. And we also put on ornaments which are often made by our children when they're young, right? Little sleighs, little candy canes, things that the kids did in nursery school and school we put up, and they last for years and years and years. Reminders to us of the passage of time. The middle of the tree is devoted to telling us, time is fleeting, you are mortal. You will not last. But this tree represents everlasting life. This green tree in your house in the dead of winter represents life everlasting, even if you won't last. But you've got someplace to go, and you came from someplace. Christmas trees are strange things, if you think about them, but usually we don't, because we just put them up. A Christmas tree speaks to something deep inside us, and they're thoroughly Christian. I know people say that Christmas trees are pagan, but it seems to me that they are reminding us of a Christian lesson, that We are not just mortal beings who will die and be gone, but rather we are beings who will last and be cradled in God's arms when we pass through this life. And they point to where we're going, which is a nice reminder to have in the dead of winter. Amen.